Patch 1.13 did bring a bunch of changes to a lot of weapons, and I am going to cover 10 different weapons today that actually did get buffed, but I'm going to split it up into winners and losers, so I'm going to cover 5 different weapons that did benefit greatly off this patch, and cover 5 weapons that didn't benefit enough. They're weapons that are underpowered, and even with these buffs, they're still not good enough. So I just want to highlight those real quick. Also, if you did want to know about the spells, don't worry, I am going to do that video tomorrow, so definitely stay tuned for that one. But just to get into it with the biggest winner of the entire patch, obviously going to the Euporia. Every single change that they made about this weapon is just amazing. I did cover it in yesterday's video as to how it did get buffed, how it now works, and a build around the weapon as well. But every single piece of criticism I had about the Euporia has just gotten fixed. You can actually gain the luster effect a lot easier now. The luster buff actually just lasts longer, and the buff is just now improved as well. It went from like a very mediocre type of weapon to this now a high S tier weapon in this game. I consider it to the best twin blade and probably a top 5 faith weapon too. The second weapon I want to touch on is the Red Bear's Claw. This weapon received an amazing buff to its skill, of which now does get more hyper armor and actually does get more damage. I do not know why this weapon actually got buffed. It was already amazing. And I did an entire challenge run today on stream just only using the skill from start to finish and including the DLC, and everything died incredibly quickly. This is an S tier skill in this game, and I think it's the best Beast Claw to use as well. That hyper armor change just trivializes every single NPC and smaller enemy encounter as well. And it's some decent hyper armor too. You can take a whole bunch of attacks and trade out very nicely with this thing. I will probably end up making a build video around this thing sometime soon alongside some other types of strength weapons. But yes, this weapon is just now a lot better. The Rakshasa Great Katana was probably an S tier weapon before the patch, but now it definitively is one because its skill, Weed Cutter, is now a lot faster, which this skill was never really like the highest damaging option, didn't really result in like amazing types of DPS, but the whole benefit of this skill was that it's add more coverage to your moveset, because this weapon does get an amazing moveset with that poking heavy attack, which poking heavy attacks are just always going to be amazing, but normally with the Great Katana you get a horizontal swipe, and horizontal swipes are always nice to have if you want to hit multiple enemies at once, or hit those enemies that are kind of skinny. But this weapon does get the Weed Cutter skill that does have very nice wide horizontal swipes. And this weapon does get amazing amounts of hyper armor as well. And with this skill being a lot quicker, you can definitely trade out with a whole bunch of enemies. Because with how fast that it swings and how much damage these Great Katanas do, and the fact that they do get bleed, this can end up being a high damaging machine. I consider this to be like the Bloodhound's Fang of like the Great Katanas. It doesn't do anything like too flashy, but it just does everything so well. The Golem Fist now does have a hitbox at point blank range when you use the heavy attack. So when you're at these closer ranges and use a heavy attack or charged heavy, you're going to be doing a lot more damage. Now at those further distances, the heavy attack is not going to be hitting that hard because like most projectile heavies in the game, especially in the DLC, they just don't really be doing much damage at all. I feel like every single one of these like free projectile heavy attacks need to get buffed, the Golem Fist included. But if you are at those closer ranges, it is just going to hit harder than most other fist weapons in the game. Now, unfortunately, they're currently bugged. I didn't want to talk about it today because of this bug, but I feel like I do need to mention it just to bring more attention to this bug. And that is the fact that it does not work with the Axe Talisman, the Spiked Cracked Tier, or the Smithing Talisman. None of these things are actually boosting the heavy attack at all. If these things actually do end up working with the Golem Fist, that could be like upwards of 40% more damage to this heavy. And the heavy attack is also going to be doing 30 stance damage as well. So actually can be a nice alternative to like the Star Fist with like a close range charged heavy attack build. But at the moment, I wouldn't make it that build because it is currently bugged. And the last of the weapon winners I want to touch on is the Falx, already an S tier weapon in this game, one of the best that actually has come out of the DLC because its skill is such a hard hitting machine. It's a power stance curve sword, which gets an amazing moveset, does get passive bleed, and whether you're using things like light attacks, jumping attacks, or the weapon skill, you can just melt so many enemies. But as of this recent patch, the skill actually now has a lot better directional control. So the tracking with that follow-up heavy attack you get after the skill is so much better. And it's honestly kind of insane. You can like 180 with this thing and track in every single which direction. So going up against those more mobile types of enemies, where typically you probably would have missed with that follow-up attack, that's just no longer going to be the case. And with how fast that it does swing, it can potentially stun lock those enemies too. Now to get into the weapons that did get buffed, but not by much. Starting off with the Greatsword of Radahn Light version, this did receive a buff to its weapon skill to where the holy projectile attacks now scale off AR. Before they did the scale off the intelligence stats, which had a descaling in intelligence, and it was just not good. Now it just scales off the weapon damage, which is great. Now unfortunately, the holy projectiles are still not that good. Even if you are using all the holy buffs, the damage is incredibly mediocre. And honestly, there's not a single weapon in this game that I hate more than the Radahn swords. Both of them, I hate them both equally. I hate the fact they don't get unique movesets. I hate that they're colossal swords with terrible intelligence scalings. I hate the fact it doesn't get a faith scaling. I hate the requirements. I hate that the Star Scourge Greatsword just gets way more damage than this thing and just have a much better skill. And I hate the fact that this is just a reskinned looking version of it and it's just way worse. Like, there's nothing that I like about them. They're like the least fun weapons to build around in the entire game because they have these weird ass scalings with these weird ass damage types that none of it makes sense. This thing 100% should have had a unique moveset, potentially have like a really cool Blood Flame AoE heavy attack or something. Probably could have made it a curved greatsword instead. This thing should just also have free holy damage as well. Just add on like a couple hundred more holy damage and give it a faith scaling too. And actually give it decent scalings across the board. Like, just give it a B scaling and everything. Strength, dexterity, intelligence, faith. Just make it the highest damaging weapon in the entire game at those really high levels. Like, we got it off the final boss in the DLC. And the weapon skills are not really that groundbreaking. So just let it have really good damage. And honestly, just combine both weapons into one and turn it into a stand skill. Like, I don't understand how they made the boss decide to go all out with that shit, not make it balanced whatsoever, and just create one of the most bullshit experiences, which honestly is not too bad. I'm like one of the few people that actually like the boss. But why is it that when they're making the boss weapons, they have to be so intricate and careful and always try to make sure that we're just not having fun when using the weapon? Like, geez, like we get it right at the end of the game. Let us have something cool. Like, these weapons need to get reworked. Like, I don't care for them to just get basic buffs anymore. Like, don't buff them, just change them completely. Or just like leave them as they are so I just don't have to talk about them anymore. But now that that rant is over, let's get into the next weapon, the Poleblade of the Bud. This actually did get a buff to its skill, Ramina's Purification, to where it now gets Hyper Armor, which is nice. You're no longer going to get staggered out of it really easily. But the problem is that wasn't the only problem. That's what's going on there. The damage still sucks. The Scarlet Rot build-up is still not good. The animation is still really long. It's not the easiest thing to control either. Like, if you hit with this entire skill, it does just as much damage as 3 light attacks, and the Scarlet Rot build-up is only about 200, which is like just as much as 4 light attacks. And that's if you hit with the entire skill combo. Which, another annoying thing about this, when Ramina actually uses this skill as part of her moveset, she actually gets a 3rd attack. But when we use it, we only get the first 2 attacks. I don't know why we didn't get the cool 3rd attack. That would have been nice to have like as an additional follow-up option. But yeah, this thing needs a dramatic increase in damage and potentially stance damage too. Like, I don't care if it doesn't get good rot buildup because the weapon itself gets rot. So I can just use the weapon to proc the Scarlet Rot, which is fine. But this needs to be like a really risky skill to use. But if you land the entire combo, you gain like a massive benefit. But as it stands right now, there's not really much of a reason to use it. The Horned Warrior Sword did get buffed to where its skill does now do a bit more damage. Now, the damage difference is not really that noticeable. The weapon itself is still fine, like their Power Stance Curve Swords, which are obviously going to have an amazing moveset. And its skill can hit at a further distance and do like a nice little AoE, so it can hit multiple enemies. You actually do get a little bit of Hyper Armor in the animation. But my major problems with the weapon is that it consumes a lot of stamina. Like, you can only really use this like one time reliably every couple of seconds. And it scales off faith, and it only gets a D-scaling in faith. Like, I hate weapons that work like this. Like, if you're having a weapon skill that scales off a particular stat, like, at least give it a good scaling in that stat, because you're always just like picking and choosing to either spec into good weapon damage or good skill damage. So this thing needs to get improved to where it gets like a B scaling in faith and have like a lot less stamina cost, and then it would be a lot more useful. But the damage boost is nice though. The Spirit Sword and the Spirit Glaive did get a buff to their skills, which is called Rancor Slash, to where it now does more damage with the Vengeful Spirits, which are like those tracking skull attacks that they do get. And they actually also do get more damage against guarded enemies. Now, my major problem with this skill is that it is just a reskinned version of Sword Dance, but it's just like not as good, and it's like twice as expensive in terms of its FP cost. Like, you can just slap Sword Dance onto a cold infused Guardian Sword Spear, and it's going to get way higher frost build up, potentially get better damage for a lot cheaper as well. Because yeah, the Spirit Glaive and the Spirit Sword only get frost build up when you're attacking with the weapon skill. The weapons themselves don't get frost build up, and they all just get terrible scalings as well. Like, I don't mind a reskin skill, but they gotta make it a bit more useful than this. They need to make these weapons just have passive frost, give them better intelligence scalings, and potentially spawn in more of those like tracking skulls, because they're only spawning like 2 or 3 skulls at a time. They spawn on like 6 or 7 skulls at a time. Like, they're being too safe with some of these DLC weapons. Like, just have some fun with it. Now, the last weapon I want to touch on is the Repeating Crossbow. It did get buffed to where it just does do more damage when it gets ramped up, which is obviously nice, but there are still plenty of problems with it. One, it still does not work with the Shard of Alexander. 2, the stamina cost is insanely high, like your entire stamina bar is just drained. And if you're fighting enemies that just like to move and dodge around, they're just gonna like dodge the entire thing. It's just not that good. And also like the stance damage is just kind of shit too. Like this thing cannot consume like 13 bolts, consume this much stamina, have you get stuck in a longer animation, have you consume a decent amount of FP, basically just to do very mediocre damage and very mediocre stance damage too. Because yeah, this thing only gets 1 stance damage per bullet. So hopefully they change it to where it does work with the Shard of Alexander and change it to where it just does a lot more stance damage and not consume anywhere near as much stamina. So if they can get those things to work with it, that'll be great. Anyway, that's me done ranting. I know people like to complain about me being negative in my videos, but it's for a good cause. If I don't complain, then nobody else will, and these things won't get buffed. The people deserve to have some more fun. But anyway, for tomorrow's video, I am going to cover these spells. I might make separate videos on both the incantations and the sorceries because there actually is a lot to talk about there. So if you are interested in that, please do subscribe. But yeah, catch you guys around. Bye.